Hey, it's Robert Fifth, and have you ever started off a musical journey with an artist or a band on the wrong foot? Kind of like with the wrong album. Well, I've done that at least 5 times, so I thought I'd share those experience with you to keep you from doing the same thing. Now, remember, we're going back to a time before the internet when you could just kind of click on whatever song you wanted in the universe and sample everything. This was back in the days when in order to hear a band or an artist or a song, you had to hear it on the radio, or you didn't hear it, or maybe you had a family member or a friend that had the records or something. You could listen to those, but other than that, there really wasn't any kind of hearing a sample or whatever. I mean, some record stores had listening stations, but they didn't have that shit at Kmart or like a lot of the record stores that I ended up going to. You couldn't do that at like Best Buy or whatever later on. So you had to rely on things like like magazine articles or books or whatever. So you had to be kind of careful, and I wasn't. Let's get things started with the Rolling Stones. Now, I started off the Rolling Stones. This is the very first thing I ever had from these guys. Now, this is great. This is a cassette called Rewind. It's a compilation that came out in 1984, and it covers all the big songs. It's all album versions. It's great. The cassette actually has 2 tracks that wasn't on the original vinyl. It's long out of print, but it's an excellent introduction to the Rolling Stones. So I'm glad I got this first. This has Miss You and Start Me Up and Brown Sugar. It's Only Rock and Roll. Even has Hang Fire and Fool to Cry. It's a great comp. I wish this was still in print. But as far as studio albums, now keep in mind I got this in 1984 because I was getting just introduced to the Rolling Stones, and I loved Undercover of the Night. But there was no way I was getting that for Christmas or birthday. Not with that cover. So had to get this. So guess what the first ever studio album I ever got from the Rolling Stones was? Yeah, it was. It was this one. My introduction to the Rolling Stones studio album was none other than 1986's Dirty Work. Now, a lot of people hate this album, but I've got a love for it because, it's my first time. What are you going to do? I actually had this on a cassette, and the first side sounded kind of muffly, and the second side sounded great. So there's some kind of defect with the cassette. I got it brand new from the store. I don't know, but I got this CD to replace it for like $4 used or whatever. But I still like some of these songs on here. Too Rude is a great kind of reggae thing from Keith Richards. Dirty Work, the title track's all right. Had It With You's kind of a rocker there. Sleep Tonight's an okay ender there. One Hit to the Body's kind of the tough single. This thing starts off with one hit to the body and then Fight. So these guys are still kind of rough and tough on here. I still think this is probably better than any of their 90s stuff, really. I know a lot of people will disagree with that, but again, I kind of got a soft spot for it. My very first Rolling Stones was Dirty Work. I never did like their Harlem Shuffle, though, version. I never cared for that at all. But yeah, you get a dirty little cartoon there, and there's the cartoon. There's the dirty little cartoon, and there's the lyrics handwritten out like that. And the cassette had that in it as well. So I just checked this out again for the first time in a long time, and I had fun with it. But probably not the best way to introduce yourself to studio albums from the Rolling Stones. Maybe some Let It Bleed or Sticky Fingers or Aftermath, or you want to do later on, like maybe Some Girls, something like that. Tattoo You, even though that's outtakes. Or maybe you start with Dirty Work. I mean, I love the Rolling Stones, so. Okay, let's do Frank Zappa now. Now, Frank Zappa, I started with this. This is called Weasels Ripped My Flesh. This is actually the Mothers of Invention. And I'm not really sure that much about this album, but I'll tell you the reason that I started my Frank Zappa journey with this. It was because of this book that my big brother got for Christmas, because my mom and dad probably knew that I'd want it, so we had this thing where you give the other kid the thing and the big fight, right. It's a great book that came out like 78, and that's we got it new for Christmas, and it's just a lot of great like album covers over the years. A little essay. I never really read the essay when I was little, but I used to like stare at this thing and look at all the album covers and just dream that one day I would have all of these. And I had a lot of them, but I don't know where it is in here. That's the country section. Cream and Yes, there's that one. Gotta have that. See, I was seeing this as a little 6-year-old and going, someday I'll have that. There's big David Bowie taking up the whole page. There's even the Stranglers. I mean, this was an awesome book. I used to stare at this thing for hours. Anyway, somewhere in here is this. Is this album. So I used to think that this was some kind of great thing. And I think this is outtakes. I think this is like a kind of a dead, like a lame duck album. This was the second album that came out after the Mothers of Invention had already broken up. It's Weasels Rip My Flesh. And it's kind of like all over the place. Like a lot of jazzy stuff going on and a lot of like goofy, like lyric, like mouthy kind of stuff. Like we're really trying to be weird here. My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama's on here. That's kind of popular. There's a couple of tributes, jazz kind of tributes that I don't really get. I just was not a fan of this at all. And I was really disappointed because I'd heard about Frank Zappa was so awesome and so out there and incredible. And he's got like 100 albums or whatever. And so I decided to start with this one based on a picture and a book that I had when I was 6 years old. So don't start with this one. I would definitely recommend if you're going to do Frank Zappa that you definitely want to start, or Mothers of Invention especially, you want to start with one of these. These are two of my favorite albums of all time. Freak Out is incredible. Not so much big of a fan of the whole thing on the one whole side thing, but the rest of it's awesome, and this is even better in my opinion. You want to make sure that you get the yellow one, not the one with the Sgt. Pepper looking cover, even though this is like the inner cover, but that one's got like the drums are replaced with drum machine, and it's just awful. But yeah, there's the original version on Ryko disc. Well, these are on Ryko disc. Why are all the discs the exact same? It doesn't matter what album it is. It's like that. Who came up with that idea? How weak. But anyway, Freak Out and Only in It for the Money. Two incredible albums from the Mothers of Invention. I would recommend starting with those. And my second one is this one. And I got this one second because I had heard, I think I read in Rolling Stone, that if you're going to do Frank Zappa, this is where you start, man. Uncle Meat is the pinnacle. It doesn't get any better. It doesn't get any more Frank Zappa than this one. And I don't get it. I don't care for this at all. I know a lot of people love this, and it makes me feel left out. It makes me feel like I'm not cool enough to appreciate the secret thing that's going on here that everybody else gets that I don't. But this is Uncle Meat. It's a 2-album set. And I found out later on that the vinyl is actually not, well, there's more on the CD than on the original vinyl. The original vinyl's 2 albums, and those are obviously included on this. But then this also has this big, long dialogue section from this unfinished film that they did called Uncle Meat, where this woman just keeps talking in this incredibly annoying voice, and I think that's supposed to be the joke. It's Susie Cream Cheese, I guess, the recurring character, and I just don't think any of it's funny or amusing or enlightening or anything. It's just kind of like the whole thing seems very self-indulgent, and I don't get it. I don't get this at all. Here's the booklet. No, here's another CD that looks the exact same, and then there's actually 2 booklets with this. There's this actual fold-out. Which has all kinds of nice artwork on it. I'm assuming that's, a lot of that is the original album. And then you also have this booklet that I think is more about, what you could have expected with the movie. And there's your whole cast of characters there. Ryko disc 2 disc set. So those are my first 2 Frank Zappas, and I really didn't do a lot more Frank Zappa for a couple of years because I'm like, well, I guess he's just not somebody that's for me. But then I get those other 2 albums a couple of years later, and my whole opinion changes. You can also get later Frank Zappa, like Apostrophe or Overnight Sensation, if you want to do later stuff. These are incredible albums as well. There's the gatefold for that. The thing about the Mothers of Invention and early Frank Zappa, they're always in really bad condition. At least the ones I've seen, they're always expensive and in bad condition. So a double reason to probably just go ahead and get the CD. But there's nothing like a nice Frank Zappa album. This one is the one with, the best is 50/50. I love that. 50/50 is on here. The Dynamo Hum is a classic. A lot of people like Montana. I'm not as big of a fan of that one. Zombie Wolf, Dirty Love is another big one. Camarillo Brillo, that's a good one. And of course, I'm the Slime starts off Overnight Sensation. Great album there. But once again, I don't get these at all. And these are the two I started with. Anyway, another theme of the video, starting with the wrong thing. Dead Kennedys. This was my first one. Frankenchrist. I got this first because I wanted to see that poster in there that everybody was talking about, which I'm not going to show. You can Google that, the Geiger poster that came with this. But there's what the inner sleeve looks like. Dead Kennedys, I would start with their earlier stuff. I mean, this is okay, but it's just kind of basic punk rock. It's not up to like their earlier stuff standards. So I got this and then assumed that this is what the Dead Kennedys were all about, and I didn't get any more for like 6 years or something because I thought, they're all right, but I could take them or leave them. This one, the Dead Kennedys' early stuff, in fact, their first song, I think, starts off with, so you've been to college for a year or two and you think you know it all. So they're more about speaking of college age or, young adults or whatever. So that, and it's very political, very human rights oriented, things like that, kind of timeless stuff that a lot of people can still relate to. This kind of harkens back to more like high school stuff. There's Jockorama about high school football player. MTV, Get Off the Air, about MTV. And it's kind of like just some easy targets here. These are the guys that sing about like Pol Pot and Cambodia and trying to make Governor Jerry Brown into some kind of complete asshole or something. But going off on the Dukes of Hazzard, and it's just kind of like, this is kind of like a for a younger audience than I think the earlier ones. So not as big of a fan of Frankenchrist. It's okay though. I mean, it's just not. If you're gonna do Dead Kennedys, you might as well do some really good Dead Kennedys and start with the earlier albums. Side note: this was the first Black Flag I ever had because there was a sticker here. Price sticker was right there that covered up both places where it says live, and I just saw that it had 64 minutes. I'm like, wow, this is a double, and it's just as much or little as the rest, so I'll get this one twice as much for the same price. It's Black Flag. Who's got the 10.5 live? And spoiler alert, it turns out the bass player has the 10.5. But this sounds pretty good. It's very bright and crisp sounding, but it is live, and it's just like one live concert. Whereas earlier Black Flag, you start with that, you get all the different vocalists, the different kind of feels and whatever, and the songs kind of go together and make a little more sense. This is a pretty good live concert, but I just thought I'd throw that in because it's not a bad place to start, but it's kind of a strange place to start for Black Flag. The whole reason I wanted to do this video to begin with is because you gotta do some Beatles in here. I mentioned this in another video. This is where I started with the Beatles. These were my first 3 Beatles albums. So a very strange place to start with the Fab Four here. But I stand behind these. These are great albums. Rock and Roll Music Volume 1 and Volume 2, as long as you have this artwork and not the 50s diner thing, which makes no sense. And this is a great package altogether. Real Music, which has songs from their movies on there, and comes with an excellent souvenir program, and the inner sleeve even is something I used to. I know I've mentioned this before in a video, but something I used to just sit and stare at as a child. And again, like that book, just like someday I'll own them all. And fun fact, there still is one on here that I don't own. I'm saving it for my 50th birthday. One of these I still do not have. But here is the... you gotta remember, this came out in 1982. I'm like 9 years old up in here. And there's no internet or anything. And, to have access to all these photos and all that... I mean, it was just great. Of course, now you can just click and save and do whatever, but... back then, that was awesome. So that's the whole reason, because people were like, "Man, you should have started with this or whatever." And those were the 3 Beatles albums I started with. David Bowie. Went ahead and started with "Tonight" from David Bowie from 1984. I got this cassette. I had not heard too much of David Bowie in my life. Living in the Midwest of the United States, he was not played here as much on the radio. He was a little too European for the Midwest. So, I mean, like Changes and... Changes? I mean, that's what was played until Let's Dance came out. And that's when I first started getting into pop music anyway, current pop music. I'm like, 10 years old at that point. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to start listening to cool new music, and he had just come out with Let's Dance. And, of course, it's got China Girl on there. And my favorite was always Modern Love. Later found out that the album has all kinds of great songs on there. But, I heard those songs and I thought they were great. And I was just about ready to go out and get my first David Bowie tape, and then Blue Jean comes out, and this comes out. So I thought, well, you know what? I'll get this one. That way, I'll have all, because this one's going to be just as good, and I'll hear all these new hits before they're on the radio, and I'll be all cool and everything. So instead of Let's Dance, I'll get his new one, and it turns out this is not anywhere near as good as Let's Dance. It's David Bowie, so it's not horrible, but it's definitely, I mean, not a place to start unless you want to start and then everything you listen to is just better and better and better. I mean, if you want to have that kind of musical journey with David Bowie, you can start with this one. But it does have Blue Jean on it, and Loving the Alien, and a couple of other good songs, but a lot of it's just very cheese, very 80s. I think Let's Dance, he kind of sounded like he was like pioneering the sound of the 80s, and it has that great Stevie Ray Vaughan. I mean, before I even knew who Stevie Ray Vaughan was. Guitar on a lot of the tracks, and on this, it sounds like he's kind of following the 80s. There's a lot of bombast. Like Dancing with the Big Boys is a song that it sounds like it's some overblown like 80s like theater piece music or something. So I would not do that. I did get the Let's Dance CD. Was much more satisfied with that. And then, of course, Changes Bowie was the what followed that. This came out in 90. So I didn't get any more David Bowie after that for like 5 years. Got this. This is the 18-track version that came out in 1990 from Ryko Disc. Man, was just blown away by all the great tracks on here. I'd never heard these songs like Rebel Rebel and Gene Genie and Ziggy Stardust and Ashes to Ashes, and I'd never heard those before, and they were just all on here. I just was introduced to all that at the same time. This does have a bad like Fame 90 remix. It's awful, but Space Odyssey was the song I was trying to think of before. Radio around here kind of played that as well as Changes. But of course, as far as studio albums from David Bowie goes, well, it depends on what Bowie you want. Do you want like guitar rocking David Bowie? Then you got to do some Ziggy Stardust or maybe Aladdin Sane. If you want some funky David Bowie, you do Young Americans. 80s David Bowie, you do Let's Dance. Some Thin White Duke kind of icy sounding David Bowie, you could do Station to Station, or just any. You're not going to lose with Heroes, obviously another great one from David Bowie. So, and of course you can't forget Hunky Dory, great early one. Probably not. Also, Kate Bush. Got started with Kate Bush on an album called The Red Shoes, which again is not a horrible album. It's just probably not where you want to start with Kate Bush. I'd heard her song Cloud Busting because a video would always come on, but I never really got the video. It just seemed kind of meandering, and it just kept going on and on and on. And this would play between like Duran Duran and Van Halen, and stuff. And then all of a sudden this 6-minute Kate Bush video. So I didn't understand that. And I'd heard her on the Peter Gabriel album So with Don't Give Up, but I was really exposed to her as a full in a full album with The Red Shoes, which I do not have, but I do have some red shoes I could show. Well, by the way, if you've never seen a Tom Hanks movie, do not start with The Man with One Red Shoe. That's another one you don't want to start a career with. Anyway, The Red Shoes, 1993, and it just kind of is her, kind of out of her element, I think, a little bit, now that I know a little more about her. It just is this basic kind of light rock music going on, but she's still trying to be her. So I much rather like her in her, when she's in her own element. She's in that great, like, avant-garde arena where she can be herself with all of the wild rhythms and the different sounds and the whole thing. The Red Shoes kind of sounds like almost like a middle-of-the-road compromise, and it wasn't really interesting to me then. Like I said, it came out at a time when it was like a lot of Tori Amos and Annie DeFranco and Sarah McLachlan and all those coming out at the same time. And I like the Tori Amos, a lot more. And so it would be years and years before I heard some definitive Kate Bush, and that was The Dreaming, which I thought was incredible. Once I finally got around to hearing that, and then of course The Kick Inside, and so I would start with those two. And if you've never heard, maybe you're in America like me, and in the middle of the Midwest, and you don't get exposed to a lot of Kate Bush, you want to start your journey, I would not do it with The Red Shoes. I would do it with The Dreaming, or The Kick Inside, or just any other thing from Kate Bush. So yeah, again, the Red Shoes is not awful or anything. It just doesn't, it's not definitive to me of her. It just sounds like another kind of early, mid-90s, Lilith Fair type light rock music, because I used to work next to a radio station that was all light rock, and they would just pour that stuff out. But with her being herself over the top of it, which doesn't seem to really compliment a lot. I love the more avant-garde stuff from her. So those are 5 examples of getting started off on the wrong foot on a musical journey. Have you done that? Maybe you've started off your musical journey with a particularly not great album. Maybe you started, yes, with the Tomato album, or maybe you started listening to Black Sabbath because you heard the Eternal Idol. You had that first because you heard how great Black Sabbath was. Or maybe you heard of this band Van Halen, and hey, their new CD is Van Halen 3. I'll check that out. And that's your introduction to Van Halen. I hope not. But are there any like that? Maybe you started your Dire Straits journey off with, well, any Dire Straits album. I'm Robert Fitton. Thank you so much for watching. Please thumb up the video, because I'm sure some people will thumb it down just because I insulted the Uncle Meat people. Even though I said I wasn't cool enough for Uncle Meat, they'll still thumb it down. You know how it goes. Please thumb up the video if you enjoyed it. Consider subscribing so you don't miss any future videos. I'm Robert Fitton. Thank you so much for watching.